Hello and welcome back to Berkay Explores, the channel where we dig into the biggest questions of our past, present, and future. Today, we have a story that sounds like it's been pulled straight from a science fiction movie. Imagine holding a piece of history in your hands, a fossil that's 1,000,000 years old. But it's not a perfect specimen. It's been mangled, compressed, and flattened by the immense pressure of time. It's almost unintelligible. A message from the deep past that's been hopelessly scrambled. Now, what if you could use cutting-edge virtual reality and 3D imaging to unscramble that message, to digitally unsquash that fossil, peeling back 1,000,000 years of geological pressure layer by layer, to reveal a face that could fundamentally change everything we thought we knew about human origins? A face that looks back at you from across an impossible gulf of time and tells you that the story of us is far older and far more complex than we ever imagined. That's not science fiction, it's the real-life story we're diving into today. And to help us unpack this incredible discovery, I'm thrilled to welcome paleoanthropologist Dr. Aris Thorne to the show. Aris, your work focuses on computational analysis of the fossil record, which makes you the perfect guide for this journey. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure, Berkay. This is one of the most exciting and contentious developments in our field in years. It's the kind of discovery that doesn't just add a new chapter to the book of human origins. It forces us to rethink the table of contents for the story of humanity itself. Everyone has to go back to the drawing board.
Let's start with the object at the heart of this story. A fossil skull known as Yunxian 2, found in Hubei province, China. What's its story?
Yunxian 2 is one of a few hominin fossils found at that site, and the dating is very solid. We know it's approximately 1,000,000 years old. Because of that age and its location in Asia, the default assumption for decades was that it belonged to Homo erectus.
And Homo erectus was, as we've discussed on the channel before, a very successful early human species. They were pioneers, known for being the first to migrate out of Africa in large numbers, wielding their iconic Acheulean hand axes with a relatively large brain. It was the main player in Asia for a very long time.
Exactly. They were incredibly adaptable, found from the plains of Africa to the islands of Indonesia. So classifying Yunxian 2 as Homo erectus was the logical, safe bet. But there was always a huge problem. As you mentioned in your intro, the skull was horribly damaged. We're not talking about a few cracks. It was crushed almost flat, like a pancake. The immense pressure of the sediment over 1,000,000 years had distorted it so severely that it was incredibly difficult to distinguish its original features from the geological damage. This damage directly led to confusion and debate for decades.
So it was a key piece of the puzzle, but the picture was too blurry to read properly. It's a bit like finding a corrupted file on an ancient hard drive.
That's a perfect analogy. For decades, all we could do was guess at what the original file contained. Was it just a damaged copy of a file we already had, Homo erectus? Or was it something entirely new and unexpected? That uncertainty made it a poster child for a period we sometimes call the muddle in the middle. This is roughly the period from about 800,000 to 300,000 years ago, where we have a collection of fossils from Africa, Europe, and Asia that are just tricky. They have a mosaic of features. Some look a bit like Homo erectus, others hint at later species. They don't quite fit the classic Homo erectus mold, but they're not quite Neanderthals or Homo sapiens either. They're intermediate. And Yunxian 2, in its crushed state, was a prime example of that muddle.
But then, technology gave us a way to restore that corrupted file, to bring that blurry picture into focus. Tell us about the reconstruction.
This is where it gets truly remarkable. The research team, led by Professor Ni, refused to accept the crushed state as the final word. This was a feat of what you might call digital archaeology. They employed high-resolution CT scanning. Think of a medical CT scanner, but with immensely greater power and precision, to create thousands of digital slices of the fossil. Then, using incredibly sophisticated computer modeling, they virtually separated the dozens of bone fragments that had been fused and distorted.
So they digitally broke it apart piece by piece, like a 3D jigsaw puzzle.
Precisely. And then came the hardest part. They had to essentially teach the computer geology and physics. They ran complex algorithms to reverse the specific distortions on each fragment, digitally undoing the million years of crushing. They essentially put the fossil in a geological time machine and ran it in reverse, virtually unsquashing it. For the first time in a million years, they were able to see its true original shape.
That's just mind-boggling. So once they had this pristine virtual skull, did it finally confirm it was Homo erectus?
And this is the bombshell. No, it didn't. The moment the final model was rendered, it was clear they had something entirely else. Some features, like the overall brain case size and the low, long shape of the skull, were consistent with Homo erectus, but other critical features, especially in the face, were completely different. It had flat, shallow cheekbones and a less projecting face, a facial structure that was far more modern, or derived, as we say in the field, than you would ever expect to see on a classic Homo erectus from a million years ago.
So if it wasn't Homo erectus, what was it?
The team compared its unique mosaic of features to other known hominins and concluded they were looking at an early form of a different species, Homo longi.
Homo longi. That's the Dragon Man fossil, also from China, which made headlines a few years ago. It was a nearly perfect skull found by a worker decades ago and hidden in a well.
The very same, and here's the crucial link that connects all the dots. Genetic and morphological evidence strongly suggests that Homo longi is our best candidate for the Denisovans, a mysterious sister group to Neanderthals.
Wait a minute, this is a huge leap. So you're saying this million-year-old skull isn't just a reclassified fossil. It might be the earliest physical face of a Denisovan ancestor we've ever found.
That is the explosive claim. And to understand why it's so explosive, you have to remember how phantom-like the Denisovans are. We know they existed and interbred with our ancestors primarily from tiny fragments, a finger bone from a child, a few massive molars from a cave in Siberia, a jawbone from the Tibetan plateau, and from the ghostly signature of their ancient DNA extracted from cave sediments. We've never had a good look at their skull. This study proposes that Yunxian 2 gives us that look, and it pushes the origin of the Denisovan lineage back by a staggering 500,000 years.
That is a massive rewrite of the timeline. What does that do to the rest of our family tree? If the Denisovan branch is that old, it must have profound implications for our own branch, for Homo sapiens.
Immense implications. Think about it logically, like a family tree. If you discover a long-lost cousin's birth certificate and find out they are 50 years older than you thought they were, it means your shared grandparents must also be much older. It's the same principle here. If one branch of the family, the Denisovan Homo longi line, was already a distinct group a million years ago, it means the split from the other branches must have happened even earlier. This implies that the ancestors of Neanderthals and our own direct ancestors leading to Homo sapiens must have also existed as separate lineages back then.
So our own origin story gets pushed back significantly. The current oldest accepted Homo sapiens fossil is about 300,000 years old from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco.
This new model suggests our lineage is much, much older. The researchers' computational analysis, where they compared the measurements of the virtual Yunxian 2 to over 100 other fossil skulls, calculated that the great three-way split between the ancestors of Denisovans, Neanderthals, and us happened around 1.3 to 1.4 million years ago.
That's more than double the conventional estimate. The timeline from ancient DNA studies, the molecular clock, usually placed that split around 600 to 700,000 years ago.
It completely changes the picture. Instead of separate species evolving sequentially, Erectus, then us and Neanderthals, it suggests these three major human lines coexisted in parallel for an incredibly long time. We're talking perhaps 800,000 years or more. They were interacting, maybe interbreeding, competing for resources and adapting across continents for a vast stretch of our history that we previously knew very little about. It makes our own recent history look like a tiny blip on the radar.
Now, with claims this big, there's bound to be skepticism. This is science, after all. What are other experts in the field saying?
The skepticism is healthy and necessary, and it comes in a few flavors. Firstly, some geneticists point out that estimating these deep divergence times is notoriously difficult, whether you use fossils or DNA. The molecular clock based on DNA relies on assumed mutation rates over millions of years, which might not be constant. The fossil-based method relies on the completeness of the fossil record, which is notoriously spotty. The error bars can be huge, potentially 100,000 years or more. So while the timeline is almost certainly older, pinning it down to exactly 1.4 million years is challenging.
So the direction of the change is significant, even if the exact date is fuzzy. What else?
Another point of contention comes from someone like paleoanthropologist Ryan McCrae. He agrees the digital reconstruction of the skull looks solid and that classifying it as an early Homo longi makes sense. He's impressed by the tech. However, he's more cautious about using that single reconstructed data point to then remap the entire family tree of over 100 other fossils. The feeling is that it might be stretching the data a bit thin, a possible overreach. His point is that it's like finding one beautifully restored classic car and then trying to write the entire history of the automotive industry based on its features alone. It's an incredibly valuable data point, but it might not be the whole story.
That makes sense. One fossil, no matter how well reconstructed, carries a lot of weight in that scenario. Is there a final major issue this new timeline creates?
Yes, and it's a big one. The ancestor problem. If the split happened 1.4 million years ago, you have to ask, who was the common ancestor to all three groups living around, say, 1.5 million years ago? Who is at that critical fork in the road? When you look at the fossil record from that time, the only widespread large-brained candidate is Homo erectus.
So this theory forces Homo erectus into the position of being our direct common ancestor, as well as the ancestor of Neanderthals and Denisovans.
It essentially has to be. And while that's plausible, many researchers have historically viewed Homo erectus as more of an evolutionary side branch, a successful cousin line, but not necessarily the direct progenitor of all later, more sophisticated groups. This new model elevates the status of Homo erectus significantly, suggesting it was a more varied and capable species than perhaps we gave it credit for.
So to summarize for everyone listening, the reanalysis of this one crushed skull from China, thanks to incredible technology, suggests that the human family tree is much older and bushier than we imagined. The neat linear progression we see in textbooks is wrong. It was a world with three major human lines, ours, Neanderthals, and Denisovans, coexisting across the Old World for the better part of 1 million years. It also places East Asia as a central hub for human evolution, not just a periphery to the story we thought was centered only in Africa.
That's a great summary. It was less of a simple line and more of a braided stream. And it leaves us with the ultimate question, the one this research throws right back at us with new urgency.
Which is?
The cradle of humanity. We have always centered the origin of our species, Homo sapiens, in Africa, and the evidence for that is overwhelming. But where did this crucial split, this divergence of the three great lineages happen? Did a common ancestor population diverge into these three groups within Africa, with some then leaving at different times? Or did an earlier ancestor, like Homo erectus, move out of Africa first, spreading across the globe, and then this great divergence happened across the vast landscapes of Europe and Asia, with our own ancestors eventually arising from a population that remained in or returned to Africa?
So the million-year-old question this fossil leaves us with is this. Did the cradle of humanity rock in one place, or was it a story that unfolded across the entire globe? Dr. Aris Thorne, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you for shedding so much light on a discovery that truly redefines our place in history.
Thank you for having me, Berkay. It's a magnificent puzzle, and we're just now finding the most important pieces. It's a wonderful time to be in this field.
And that's all the time we have for today on Berkay Explores. What do you think? Does this change how you view our deep past? Which theory about where the Great Split happened makes more sense to you? Let me know in the comments below. As always, keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.